First question is, in your opinion, why are patches so important to the space program?
Well, patches can actually be traced all the way back to medieval times, but they were called coats of arms back then. And essentially, it's a piece of artwork that links people to a certain family, a certain mission, a certain uh, program. And, back when I was a kid, it was illegal to own space patches. They were for NASA employees and the contractors, and they were not available commercially. And that didn't change until I want to say late 69, 1970 timeframe. And you'll notice that everybody that works on a space flight, not just the astronauts, but everybody, the white room, the folks that help build a vehicle, everybody's got the patch on their jacket or they've got a decal on their briefcase or something. And it just identifies them as a contributor to that effort. And it's an icon that links people. And I think that's why it's important.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, what are your earliest memories of the American space program?
A small black and white TV in Hartford, Connecticut, watching Alan Shepard launch. Yeah, I'm that old.
All right, so all the way back to Shepard. Well, as you were growing up, how did you get into artistry and art?
Well, I was always a left brain kind of kid, I imagine. My paternal grandfather, worked in a paper mill. And when he and my grandmother came to visit, they would bring a ream of paper and a box of pencils, and I was happy as a clam. I mean, I had all the art supplies, and then of course, we got into crayons and markers and all those other things. But, I was drawing from my earliest memory, Hopefully the artwork's a little better by now.
So after that, when you started getting into art as a young person, as you grew up, what inspired you to get involved in the space program, and how did you get involved?
Well, it's a two-pronged story. When I was 16 in 1972, I wrote to my senator and said, I need to see an Apollo launch. The program is ending, and I want to see a Saturn V fly. And darned if he didn't say yes. Nobody in my family was expecting a yes. They were thinking, okay, you'll get a nice response saying thank you for your interest, but. And so when he did make the arrangements and NASA did plan to invite me, I had to write back and say, can you invite my dad? Because I was 16. I couldn't rent a car or a hotel or anything, back then. And we came down here in December of 72 and had a glorious 3-day trip, and I saw the last mission to launch to the moon. And at that time, in the exhibits and so forth at KSC, I learned that an outside artist, I had always assumed that astronauts either did it or artists that worked for contractors or NASA did all that kind of artwork in-house. And that was not something available to outside people. Well, the artist who painted the Apollo 17 patch was Robert McCall, and everybody vaguely familiar with his work. It's everywhere. It's National Space Museum and everything. And so I said, this is how I can contribute. And then in 1973, during when the speed up to Skylab, Frank Kelly Freeze, who was an artist I was familiar with with Marvel Comics, he worked on Spider-Man, wrote an article in a magazine how he designed the first increment patch for Skylab, Conrad Kerwin and White's crew. And inside that article, it was like a set of blueprints, how they went through the sketches, the drafts, and how they tweaked them and everything else. So I had the inspiration from Bob McCall. I had the blueprints from Frank Kelly Freeze, and I started writing to astronauts that summer. Well, the first opportunity came in the summer of 73 when the second increment crew, Bean's crew, their spacecraft developed a leak in the reaction control system. So NASA had plans for a rescue, and they started implementing them, putting them in work, preparing the booster and stacking the vehicle and so forth. So I wrote to Vance Brand with a design for a Skylab rescue patch. And by the time he responded, because he was, had other things to do, preparing to fly, he wrote back in September that they had developed a workaround and that a rescue wasn't necessary. Well, I met him in 2017 at Space Fest in Tucson. And I said, sir, you have no reason to remember this, but in 1973, I wrote to you with this patch idea. His wife spoke up and said, I know exactly where that is. He had kept the artwork for 44 years, and he mailed it back to me in September of 17.
Wow. That's
yeah, that's what I said. Who knew that he would keep, and it was in pristine condition, so he stored it well.
Mm. So once you started writing to astronauts, not necessarily as an officially chosen design, but what was your first design of any kind that went into space?
Well, the first one that succeeded was Expedition 11 in 2005. I had been invited by Bob Crippen in 1985 to submit artwork for STS-62A, but that mission was canceled after the Challenger accident. And so I kept at it, and most of the letters were very, all the letters were very gracious, but most of them, thank you, but we've already chosen another artist. Well, I was in Connecticut. I was not exactly in the epicenter of space program news and information. So by the time I learned of something, it was, past when all that kind of stuff would happen. So I just kept at it. My wife and I decided to move to Titusville, Florida in 1991 so I could become more involved in the program. And I contacted John Phillips in 2004, and he said, sure, you can work with us on our patch design. And Expedition 11 that launched in April of 2005 was the first one to fly.
Okay. All right. Well, thinking about the patches that you went on to design, including both designs that got selected, designs that didn't make the cut. What's your favorite one that you've ever done?
Well, I get asked that question all the time, and I understand it. They're all great looking patches, in my opinion, and but each one has a memory attached to it. The experience of working with the crew and the back and forth and so forth. And I always answer that question with the next one. The next one will be my favorite.
Okay.
Because that means I'm not done yet.
You mentioned a bit of the process that you learned about with regard to the Skylab mission patches. So, what's your personal process, and does it differ? Is it the same? What are all the elements that go into that?
Well, I'm sure it's similar. I try to study the mission, so I'm a bit familiar with, okay, which vehicle are they flying? What's their payload? What's their mission goals? And I try to I start out pen and ink. I try to sketch out, what if I was there, what would I want to illustrate about this mission? What makes it different? What makes it special? Because every crew wants something unique. And, you can't just show a round patch with the space station on it and call it a day. You have to, it has to mean something specific to that mission. And the crew is always helpful with ideas and their thoughts because, they've been thinking about their patch longer than I have. And so they will frequently come up with suggestions. And I always try to illustrate that suggestion because it might work out fantastic. And then they have a greater sense of ownership. Or it might just look terrible. But you have to show them that this is why that's not going to work. And I always make recommendations based on my experience, but they make all the decisions because ultimately it's their patch. It's not mine.
Mm-hmm. All right, that makes sense. Talking about, you know, the space shuttle program and sort of going to the end of that program, we know that you worked on the design for STS-135, the final mission. What contributions did you make to that design?
Well, and I got an email from Rex Waldheim about that in January before they flew that year. Everybody was submitting artwork for 135. I mean, it was everybody's last shot. And so they were inundated with ideas from people, and a lot of great ideas, because I got to see a few of them. And but the one idea that Jorge Karts and I submitted, and that was adapted, was the blue background and the red NASA vector from the meatball patch behind the stack, because Rex Waldheim's wife is the designer of that patch. But he did credit us with incorporating our idea, because that was in our patch artwork. And he said, we liked the way that looked, so they adopted it. And he let me know that in an email in January of 11.
Okay. All right. You said a minute ago, by the way, that your most favorite patch will be the next one. So you still work with the space program?
I have not worked with an astronaut crew in a couple of years now, because most of the people I worked with retired, moved up to management, or went into private industry. But there is a member of the Artemis team that I've worked with, and I'm hoping that he'll choose us to take my artwork to the moon. But I've done work for other NASA entities, the flight directors and the Vehicle Integration Test Office here at KSC, and I've gotten a lot of commercial success, because all of the artwork I've done with mission patches, that was pro bono. It was for the experience of working with these folks, and it frankly has opened doors to clients. They'll say, "Oh, you did this mission patch for NASA. Can you do something for us?" And so that has worked out well, and I'm very grateful for that. It's funny, because in that magazine article from 1973, Frank Kelly Freas talked about the fee that he charged and all that. And in the first paragraph of Robert Crippen's letter to me in 1985 was, "We have no way to pay you for this." So between 1973 and 1985, rules had changed. But hey, I would have given him my left arm to design that patch. So,
Yeah, sure. As wouldn't we all? Last question. In the entirety of your career, art and otherwise, NASA and otherwise, what's something that you want to talk about that no one ever asks you about?
Well, my road to success was bumpier than it needed to be, had more curves and obstacles, because I was stubborn as a young man. I quit college to get married. I fell in love, and I wanted to get a job and support my wife. And while I'm very happily married 42 years later, if I could go back in time, I would finish school, and I would have gotten an art degree. And because the road to success was more difficult than it needed to be. And I always tell students when I get a chance to speak with them, stick with something you fall in love with, whether it's engineering or science or even math. If you enjoy doing it, you will do a good job and you will be happy in your career. But if you have a goal, if you have a specific goal that you want to accomplish in that career, never give up. Because, I wrote my first letter in 1973 and I didn't get a yes until 2004. So an overnight success 31 years later. So, I mean, that's an entire generation. And sure, there were probably times in that 31 years where I could have just said, well, the heck, this is never going to happen, so let me move on to something else. But it was something I very much wanted to do, and I'm very grateful that I've been able to do it 20 times now.
thank you so much for your time, and thank you for talking with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you guys for asking me.